Hello everyone. So, youth should be a catalyst of change. As Kofi Annan has rightly pointed out, that any society that fails to tap into the energy and innovation of its youth will not succeed. So, keeping in mind the spirit of youth and to celebrate it further, we have organized this youth summit under Sarkari School by Policy Research and Advocacy team of Sarkari School. So, to initiate this event, I would like to invite Prerna for a welcome address.
Namaste, hello, and assalamu alaikum to all. I am Prerna, and on behalf of the entire Sarkari School team, I would like to extend a warm welcome to all our esteemed guest speakers and the lovely audience. We are very grateful that you all made the time to participate in this summit. In this panel, we have five speakers from five different countries. We have with us Fabiola Palumbo from Italy, Marco Garcia from Mexico, Neil Swanepoel from South Africa, Samaher al-Hadheri from France, Jaslyn Gunawan from Indonesia. We are delighted to have you all here. Now, I'm sure that everyone has a few questions about the organization and the objectives of this summit. Sarkari School is an initiative of WeCitizens Foundation, which is a non-profit organization and works in the field of school education, child rights, and menstrual hygiene. In view of India's presidency of G20, we wanted to organize a youth summit where we can have a comparative discussion on the educational models of the G20 nations and take inspiration. We are all aware that young minds are full of ideas and innovation, and that they should become the force behind the fulfillment of SDG Goal 4, which is education for all. Through this summit, we aspire to connect such youth for a changed and better future. Each of our speakers will present a 10-minute speech, followed by a short discussion afterwards.
Yes, thank you so much, Prerna, for giving us an insightful account of the organization and also familiarizing us with the objectives of this summit. Now, I'm sure all of us are equally excited to listen to our speakers from overseas. So, let us quickly move ahead, Abhiniti.
Yeah, sure. Let us start off with our first speaker of the session. We have with us Fabiola Palumbo. She has been a youth rights activist since the age of 16. In her career, she has managed youth associations and contributed to the success of projects and campaigns for important international NGOs about education in youth policy. She graduated with a master's degree from the University of Padua in social psychology at the age of 23, doing an intensive course on community project management at the University of Sydney. She is now 25 years old and works as a youth worker for the Puglia region in Italy within a youth policy program. We welcome you, Fabiola.
Thank you very much. Can I start?
Yes,
Yeah, go
Fabiola, you
ahead.
may start.
Thank you. I have a little delay between the communications, so I prove to tell me if something is not wrong in my speaking. Okay, thank you very much. And first of all, thank you, especially to Zachary School for organizing this summit and for the students. I think that who are listening to us. As you said, I should talk about the Italian education system, and it's not an easy task at all. My country is known for many things. I think pasta, pizza. Yeah, it's the probably the best ones. But you hardly hear of Italy as a nation where life of young people is easy. In my opinion, the life of a young person is not easy anywhere in the globe. And maybe I try to introduce myself in order to get to the heart of the discussion. I'm Fabiola, and I'm turned 25 a few years ago, and I'm living the dream of working in youth policy, a job that coincides with my life goals, but also with my community goals. And this is a job that I discovered 10 years ago. I'm from the southern of Italy, from a beautiful city called Bari, and that maybe you listen to Polignano Mare, it's near Bari. And the South has always been seen as a card to be pulled, all too heavy because of poor education. And I have to say that this is not a perception. In 2021, in southern Italy, only 38% of young people had a diploma, which is like the compulsory school. And in general, there are a lot of young people in Italy who left the school early, and these figures makes Italy far from the European benchmark on education set by Europe 2020 strategy. So, talking about the school system, I have to say that it works as follows. Children between the ages of 3 and 7 go to a preschool, which is not mandatory. Then there is the beginning of compulsory school. I mean, the first cycle of education is 5 years of primary school, and then we have 3 years of secondary school. After that period, there is the second cycle of education of 5 years, which is like the high schools. From here, the specializations of the children change. There are different addresses that change the subjects to be studied, divided into technical institutes, vocational institutes, and high school. And the main differences between these three types of school are that high schools are focused on subjects that serve to study society and science. While in technical colleges, one studies subjects that are useful for economic and productive development of the country. And finally, in vocational colleges, one learns a trade. So it's not very specific as the study of society. Compulsory schooling ends at the age of 60 years old. So, talking about the organization of the school, in Italy, school is open from September to the beginning of June, and the subjects and curricula are chosen by the Ministry of Education and Merit. This means that apparently all schools in Italy with the same address will study the same things. And school hours are in the morning. Each type of school has a number of hours to be covered. For example, the science-oriented high school, which is the one that I've studied, have hours that are between 27 and 30 hours per week, distributed over 5 or 6 days per week. It depends on school. With regards of educational methods, laboratory activities could be activated. I'm a big fan of laboratory activities, but it depends on the individual school. With the exception of educational schools where laboratories are more common as they are preparatory to learning a trade. In other schools, it's by far more common that lessons are one way. I'll talk better. A teacher speaking and students listening to the lecture, taking notes, and carrying out questions and tests. The school places a great importance on grade. Each test or question must give a grade on a 1 to 10 scale, and the grade is chosen on the basis of the correctness of the information given. The test is insufficient if it has a grade below 6. When a child repeatedly gets insufficient marks in a subject, he risks failing the subject and having to pass the summer test in order to continue with the next grade and get a diploma. If a child has insufficient marks in more than 4 subjects, then he will fail the whole years. So he will have to repeat the year again. Honestly, it is difficult for me to speak well on the Italian education system, especially hearing about the ones of other countries. Talking precisely about the evaluation issues, the importance given to grades is so big that it causes psychological distress in students. I speak better. Rhetoric of merit is increasingly spreading in Italy, so much that the Ministry of Public Education itself has changed its name in Ministry of Merit and Education. And this is a statistic that proves that one of 4 children suffers from anxiety disorder. And it's known that one of the main causes of teenage suicides in Italy is school failure. The latest tragedy occurred 2 days ago in Milano. At 19 years old student took her own life because of her university grades. In order to maintain high standards, students are forced to study for hours in the afternoons and evenings, giving up other activities that maybe can be good for their mental health. So, what is my opinion? I think that is a complete mistake to base a school career only on grades instead of learning based on improving on mistakes. From my memories of school, the syllabuses were so dense that there was no time to work on mistakes in class assignments. You either succeed or fall behind, and that I think that that's not fair. I have to say that. Fortunately, someone in Italy has realized this and is changing the method. The Margagni High School in Rome, for example, has for the past few years created a no grade section, meaning that numerical grades are avoided during the 2 years high school period, the first 2 years. And this is not eliminate failure, but has improved the mental health of the students. I have to think that another aspect of the school system that some institutions are trying to change, fortunately, is the lack of relevance of the subject studied. To give an example, the history syllabuses in high school are stuck on Second World War, while the events of the Roman Empire are repeatedly reviewed. And thus students know little about the dynamics of current political and economical phenomena. Fortunately, there are 11 schools that have decided to change the curricula. The idea comes from a professor in my region in southern Italy, Puglia, who decided to set up 4-year courses mandatory for high school with a team that is quite strange. It's a self-entrepreneurship. But the innovation, in my opinion, depends above all on the methodology used. There is no longer lectures, one-way students and teachers, but debates, workshops, and creativity gyms. I think that this is a big step forward in our school system, and I hope that is a good practice that can be shared in the future. And another good thing of the school system is that in Italy most schools and universities are public. But it happens that the best educational institutes are private. Public schools allow students to attend classes, but they rarely provide them with the discounts on buying textbooks or school trips. In public universities, although fields are based on family income, but in Italy we're a bit far from granting the right of study. In fact, as the Istat 2021 report shows, only 1 in 4 young people have a university degree in Italy. The obstacles of a young person has to overcome to obtain a university degree aren't, in my opinion, only about grades, but are social and economics. The recent crisis, to give like an example, has led to an increase in the cost of living. A student who doesn't have the university in his own time is forced with a huge outlay in order to be able to afford to study, with cost that includes also accommodation and the cost of living in another city that are really covered in full by the regional scholarships. Advocating for free university means protecting the right to study and ONU's sustainable development goal 4, but indirectly also goal 8 on decent work. In fact, the moment of training work transition is one of the most sensitive, not only in Italy. I think that all of you is in this phase of the life. In Italian universities and schools, there are no customized orientation activities, and therefore it often ends up that the job that supposedly will guarantee you a secure salary wins out. The lack of ability to make students think about their future through customized career guidance leads to students being completely disoriented once they leave school or university. To make up for this shortcoming, traineeship has been set up during the school years on the high schools. But the choice of doing this traineeship depends on agreements on individual schools makes with company, not with the will of the students. This was an attempt to bring the school closer to the world of work, but without giving the students the opportunity to reflect on what they wanted to do. On the top of that, some company doesn't protect the students in internship. There's no reimbursement of expenses for them, and safety at work is not always protective. I want to give you some data. In Italy, curricular traineeship, also in university, not only in schools, are not paid by law. In between January and May 2021, 3 boys died during school internships, and many others were injured. Okay, so I found the reason of this scenario in the lack of capacity of the environment to respond to the real needs of the new generation. It's not only family, friends, school, or university that needs to take care of young people, but also the whole educating community. Formal education is part of the educational process, but if we think that it's all, we became blind to the needs of young people. If access to university is not easy, neither are the possibilities for younger people to have an educational growth in less formal context. I have to say that for our young people living in peripheral areas, it's difficult to have opportunities to learn anything that is different from the mandatory schooling. So workshop that provide soft skills or sports are not easily accessible, and so are vocational trainings. In Italy, some non-profit organizations are setting up community education centers, and those centers is often fill the gaps in the education formal system. It's mistakenly believed that learning poverty is only about school drops out and difficulty in finding work. That is a reality in Italy. But I think that nothing could be more false because, in my opinion, learning poverty is a loneliness in a community that doesn't consider you a priority. And so I finished my speech, and thank you again.
Yes, thank you so much, Fabiola. That was amazing. Like, we got to know a detailed account of how the Italian educational system looks like, and even we got to learn about some things which they can improve on, or some aspects which even the Indian education system can adopt, surely. So, um, so Fabiola, as you are a youth right activist, if I'm not wrong, so there so like I just wanted to know that we have a question from our audience. So coming to rights are something which have a great impact on our choices as well as results of the things we do. So do you think that Italian education system has embraced the this phenomena of youth right awareness in their education system? And also we wanted to have some insights about Italian youth and how are they aware of their rights and all,
Okay,
yeah.
it's not an easy question, I have to say. In my opinion of young people is that the Gen Z of Italian person are is a generation that has a lot of courage on defending their rights. And I'm born in the early years of Gen Z, so I work for the Gen Z, and it's my favorite generation. I don't think that school itself improved their activist point of view, but I think that they are able to being in non-formal groups that, like collettivi, we say in Italy, that can advocating for the right of study. I have to say that in me itself, I started in also in collettivi in school. So non-formal party they are, but it's not in the institution of school. Thank you.
Yeah,
Thank you so
thank you
much,
for that answer.
Fabiola, for such a thoughtful answer. Now, I would like to welcome our next speaker, um, who is from the country of South Africa, Neil Swanepoel. Neil is a graduate from the University of Cape Town, where his research focused on public diplomacy and China Africa relations. Currently, he is working as an analyst at the development consulting firm Genesis Analytics. His projects focus on the role of technology in international development. In 2022, he served as a South Africa's delegate to Y20, working on youth centered policy recommendations, focusing on equitable digital transformations. Before this, Neil completed an internship at the United Nations in Namibia and has also been an IMF Young Fellow in 2021. We welcome you, Neil.
Thank you very much, everyone. It's absolute pleasure to be here. I've got a small presentation. Is it possible to share my screen?
Sure, you may.
Thanks. Let's see if this works. Hang on. Is my slide visible at the moment?
Yeah,
Yes, it's visible.
Great. Okay, so I'll jump right in. So yeah, my name is Neil Swanepoel. I'm from South Africa, and I thought I'd approach my speech for today through the lens of global perspectives and local solutions, and seeing how that can be of use to sort of our collaborative and comparative discussion of education across the G20. So I think I'd like to start with saying that education is both universal and deeply contextual. Think about it. All of us use language to communicate, but the language that we use is specific to where we are from or where we grew up. And the more that you learn and you travel, and you realize that there's not just one form of knowledge. And this means that for every large problem, the good news is that there's likely a variety of different answers to overcome these problems. So I'm going to argue that sharing these different answers to these big problems are going to be very, very important in the 21st century. And this is because I think that there's three trends that's going to shape our future. The first is global challenges like climate change and geopolitical insecurity. The second one will be the big demographic changes that we'll be experiencing over the next 50 years. And then the third one is economic changes, the future of work and how different technologies are going to impact that. Now, these will all impact us a lot, but they're all going to impact us differently and unequally. So let me give you an example. The city of Mumbai in India is home to 22 million people. But it's expected to be completely underwater by 2050 due to rising sea levels. I mean, India has never had to deal with such a problem before, but the Dutch have. 2/3 of the Netherlands is currently below sea level. But over decades of innovative engineering and water management, they've kept their country afloat somehow. So if you try and collaborate through science and education, perhaps India can learn how to do this as well. And I truly believe that in examples like this, education models that integrate global knowledge practices to local solutions will be much more resilient to future challenges. So just a quick outline of how my presentation is going to work. I first want to talk briefly about South Africa's education system and its successes, focusing specifically on the concept of indigenous knowledge. Then I'm going to go to my sort of expertise, which is the role of technology in 21st century education, and then just finish off with how we can all have impact in our own communities as youth. So let me jump right into South Africa. So a little bit of a history lesson. Before 1994, South Africa was under the racist white minority rule of the apartheid government. And this system of segregation extended to education. And non-white South Africans received a lot lower quality education and limited opportunities for university studies. Now, after Nelson Mandela became the first president of a democratic South Africa, major educational reforms took place. Racial integration meant that Black students could receive better education, and there were no formal barriers to tertiary education. But inequality is a stubborn thing, and it's not easy to get rid of. So almost 30 years after this transition to a democratic, non-racial society, Black youth still face massive challenges in educational access. 32% of Black South Africans have only 32% of Black South Africans have completed high school, compared to 83% of white South Africans. Corruption, lack of funding, and low levels of quality teachers in public schools have also resulted in underwhelming educational potential for these historically marginalized communities. Another sobering statistic is that second one on your screen, which says that in the last 20 years, the enrollment of Black South Africans in tertiary education has only increased by 2.5 percentage points. And with the COVID-19 pandemic and the already low levels of education, this has really created an unemployment plague, with a shocking 64% of youth aged 16 to 24 that are outside the education system currently have no job. It's quite, it's not an enviable situation. But I don't want to just focus about that. I want to focus on a particular positive feature of South Africa's education system, which is about its promotion of indigenous knowledge systems. So IKS refers to knowledge, practices, skills, beliefs of local communities that have developed over generations in their specific environment. The picture you see here is of the local San people that live in the Kalahari Desert, who are one of the oldest cultures and communities, human communities in the world, and they have a fascinating way of surviving in very harsh areas. And I think South Africa has been great about incorporating local knowledge systems into their school systems. Now, traditionally, these systems have been seen as unscientific, not really worthy of anything. But there's a lot of policies to sort of taking steps to break this colonial bias, this heightening of Western knowledge systems as opposed to local knowledge systems. So some ways that the country's done that is that South Africa has 11 official languages, and these languages are offered in school curriculums. Indigenous knowledge is being incorporated into subjects like geography and languages in schools to better understand different local African perspectives. And there's also been an increasing collaboration with local communities in the country to study IKS and make them more rigorous. Now, there's real benefits that can be made when you interface local and foreign knowledge systems together. So take climate change, for an example. Indigenous knowledge can greatly improve the way that we approach disaster risk management. In South Africa, local communities can develop early warning systems by observing animal behaviors and specific changes to the environment. The Xhosa people in South Africa build huts from clay and mud. These are a lot more resilient to like the floods and the earthquakes in their areas. And these are practices that the concepts can be exported and adapted to different ways in different countries. And I think that's what I want to leave you with in terms of this aspect. So while South Africa does face a lot of challenges in reform, in education, particularly regarding capacity, funding, and infrastructure, it does serve as a model for integrating these indigenous knowledge systems and rediscovering the expertise of its own people and its own history to solve complex challenges. Second part that I want to talk about is technology and how that can be used to sort of drive education in the 21st century. I'm a huge believer in this, the power of technology, and it's been a topic of priority at the Y20 level, and one that I was personally involved with last year as a delegate. So I think the first and most overwhelmingly amazing aspect of technology is its potential for inclusion. So access to the internet was one of the greatest equalizers for education ever, really. There's, as you can see there, in 2000, there were only 361 million internet users. In 2021, 4.9 billion, which is just, it's an increase of over 1,300%. It's remarkable. And through platforms, online platforms like Coursera or edX, Udemy, these are platforms where people can enroll in courses on a huge variety of subjects for free, and they can study them at their own pace through a variety of digital tools. You don't need a computer, you can do it through your phone. Just simply having access to Google search or YouTube, apps like Duolingo, you can learn to code, you can learn language for free. I really think that never in the history of humankind has so much knowledge and assistance been accessible almost for free to this many people. So last year, the Y20 advocated for the increased legitimacy of these alternative educational models that are outside the sort of traditional institutions of education, and to recognize them, so that when, for example, a low-income girl from India applies to be an engineer, the company tests your knowledge, not the fact that you came from have a degree from an expensive university, or whether you just learned it through your mobile phone in a rural home. And I think that's the key equalizer that technology can do. The second aspect is on quality. So technology has also improved education in ways that I don't think we could have even imagined 30 years ago. Digital tools like smart devices have made learning a lot more immersive. In the next few years, I think virtual reality will redefine interactive learning. And initial case studies has just shown that when you're immersed in different environments for learning, the time taken to understand and grasp difficult concepts are dramatically reduced. Artificial intelligence and educational systems based on artificial intelligence can help personalize education to learners' specific needs and interests. And this is a game changer for people with learning disabilities. If you have dyslexia or ADHD, these sort of learning models can be personalized to help you learn the way that you can best. And that's incredible. And I think this is specifically an opportunity where cooperation between the global south and the global north is really important. So developed G20 countries need to ensure that the knowledge and the skills, the cutting edge technology that they are developing, trickles down and is shared with the rest of the world. And the last one is on collaboration. So things like remote learning, working on research projects across languages, across geographical barriers, that's already very, very accessible today. And the other thing that's really interesting is open data and platforms where data is being pooled from various places and shared via the internet. And let me give you an example of how open data and collaboration can be great for education. When you collect a vast amount of data through the digitization of education, that data can be used to generate insights to address the public policy challenges in education. It can identify the geographies, the population groups that are lagging behind, that are marginalized. It can create better insights on what learning approaches are effective for different people. And in terms of economics, it can also be used to understand if there's a mismatch between the demand and the supply for skills in education in a country. And so I think technology is a great example of global perspectives, local solutions, which is the theme of my speech. That by sharing and leveraging the advancements of the internet, of software, and of these tools, we can really improve our own lives and those in our community. So to conclude, what can we do? How can we make sure that what we're saying today, is translated into action? And I think that something that I've definitely experienced is, as young people, we often feel we don't have the power to change things. We don't have the authority to persuade decision makers. But I think we can make up for this. We can make up for this in our creativity, our energy, and our newfound tools to organize ourselves. So at the grassroots level, I think, it's very simple, but we can just share what we learned today. We can inspire our friends and our family and our community and the people who look up to us by telling them of these different ideas that we've discussed today. And inspiration can be contagious. You never know how fast ideas can travel, by word of mouth. So let's make sure that the conversations we have today continue in our own communities so that they can take root and grow. At the community level, I think there's such a good capacity to create coalitions between different stakeholders, between youth and teachers, the private sector and the development sector. I think you'd be surprised how much areas of agreement and cooperation can happen in those. And I think that it's also important that we use the channels available for us to really propose policies at an institutional level. Last year at the Y20, I was really fortunate to speak with the CEO of MyGov, which is an online platform in India launched by the government to give Indians a platform to participate and share ideas of how governance and development challenges can be addressed. And I think that is an incredible example of using the right channels for a real bottom-up approach to educational development. And I think the last thing is just to go back to technology. There's so much use that we can derive from the digital sphere. So I think our young people's capacity to organize and work together is more important and possible now more than ever. I mean, this summit is an exact example of youth getting together, talk about big issues through technology. And I think the other thing that we should realize is that education goes beyond just school. There's so much value to be unlocked through other forums of education that don't require the immense sort of bureaucratic and administrative task of reworking the whole educational curriculum of your country. Think of self-study through online courses, creating communities of learning through digital platforms. Think of Discord servers or Reddit, communities. These are all online communities that can really create meaning. And then I think cultural exchange is another way that ideas can be shared and people can be understood in ways that definitely wasn't possible a long time ago. And I think last thing, most importantly, is just to inspire people not to give up. It sometimes really seems that there's just so many challenges in this world, and young people have no capacity to change. But I think let's all just take home the message that the world is big. It's an exciting place, and young people across the world have the same hopes and visions and ideas to create a better future. And I hope that's what I'd like to leave you with today. Thank you very much.
Yes, thank you so much, Neil, for highlighting the importance of technology. Like we all know that it has become a really inevitable part of education system in general. Uh, so, and also, thank you so much for highlighting the role of technology in making education more and more inclusive for people with some kind of disabilities like ADHD or differently able people for that matter. So we can provide them with a more personalized set of learning tools through which they can benefit and create a future of themselves. So uh, I personally think that digital inclusion is a very serious topic which we need to focus on more and more increasingly, because as UN Undersecretary General Ms. Amina Mohammed said, that digital divide can be a new face of inequality. So, in Indian context particularly, or even if we consider around the world, we can observe that there are some remote rural areas or some areas where there is a very minimal access to technology. So, like, what would be your recommendations, and in what ways can we incorporate them in this mainstream of learning through technology, and how can we take things further with that?
I think that's an incredibly important question, and I think sometimes when we think of technology, we think of the most cutting edge first, and we don't remember that a lot of the things that we can achieve with technology doesn't need to be that high tech. And I think a lot of African countries have pioneered this idea of mobile first. So we're not, in Africa, people aren't accessing all these tools through huge computers or iPads or iPhones. It's rather through quite basic mobile devices. And I think once you've got a device that can be connected to the internet, you obviously also need that base level of connectivity, which I think is still a big problem across large parts of the global south, but the trends are very promising. So part of the statistics I showed about internet access, it's predicted that the 4.9 million people that now have access to internet is set to increase by another 2 million in the next 10 years, which is, 2 billion in the next 10 years, which is an incredible trend, a positive trend. So I think once you've got access to a mobile device, you've got access to internet, I think that is the baseline to focus on in just getting the foundational access to the digital world.
Thank you so much, Neil, for such an answer. And I truly agree that since internet is available for all, so we should try and get it more accessible to others as well, because it has become an integral part of the education system at this point. Moving on to our next speaker, we have someone who is dedicated to the education sector and has some interesting opinions. We have Samaher al-Hadheri. So she holds an MA in Geography, Planning, Environment and Development from the Sorbonne University. Her master's thesis focuses on Yemeni refugees in Djibouti based on fieldwork research she conducted in Djibouti city and the Markazi refugee camp. She has worked at the French Parliament, UNESCO, and the National Office for the Assistance of Refugees and Disaster-Stricken People in Djibouti. Currently, she works for the Global Education Monitoring Report and is a member board of directors of the Union of Exiled Students in France. We welcome you.
Hello,
You're on mute.
everybody. Can you hear me? Yeah. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Hello? Oh, great. Great. So, thank you for having me today. Hello, everybody. My name is Samaher. You can call me Sam, and I am from Yemen. As I represent France today, I will speak about the access of higher education in the perspective of exiled people, because I wasn't born and raised here. So I will speak in this aspect of exile only. I will try to share a presentation. Share screen. Um, can you the PowerPoint? Hello.
Yes, Samair.
Yes, I'm sorry. I just needed to make sure if you have access to the PowerPoint. I am. That's on my screen.
Yes, yes, that's visible.
So, so I was saying that I'll speak about the access of higher education in the perspective of exile through the work and the research done of the French nonprofit organization called the Union of Exiled Students, and as a member of this member of directors of this organization, which defends the access of exiled individuals to higher education and works to develop favorable conditions in four main pillars, which are access to information, individual support, and advocacy and collective training. So we define an exiled person or exiled student as anyone who has left their home country, who wishes to settle in France and pursue studies here, regardless of their administrative status. So I intend to highlight the challenges faced by exiled individuals in the context of pursuing higher education, and I aim to provide recommendations in accordance with the principles of equality and non-discrimination. This is based on the premise, of course, that higher education is a tool for inclusion and that allows full participation in the political, social, and economic aspects of the society. So the right to education is a human right. It's enshrined in many international instruments, including the Article 13 of the International Covenant on the Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights, which was ratified, by the way, by France, and France is a state party. So the state parties to the present recognize that the right of everyone to education and higher education shall be made equally accessible to all on the basis of capacity by every appropriate means, and in particular by the progressive of introduction of free education. So, in the summer of 2015, following the Syrian refugee influx, a relatively high educated population arrived in France. And the question of their university integration gradually imposed itself on the institutional agenda, which led to the creation of bridge university diplomas in some institutions, but without the establishment of a public policy strategy at the state level. So the universities, they act together. So we have to note that access to higher education is one of the priorities of the 2018 Global Compact of Refugees, which is considered a real stepping stone in the employment and building a sustainable integration path. The fourth goal of the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals states that by 2013, it should be ensured that women, men have access to quality vocational tertiary education, including university. However, to date, higher education is only guaranteed for a minority of refugees in their host countries. The migration policies for over 20 years have set up a set of barriers that make it difficult for people in exile to lead dignified and fulfilling life. So the university is increasingly affected by the spread of these policies towards refugees, exiled students. Access to higher education is not universally guaranteed, and refugees and exiled students face significant challenges and obstacles. And I have been an exiled student, so I would know that also. I have a personal experience in that. This makes access to education difficult, and as a result, the possibilities of integrating into the host country socioeconomic life. So the main challenges right now that we are facing in France, which the Union of Exiled Students came up with after research, it's the lack of identification of needs and the non-existent census. At no point in the asylum application process are individuals informed of their rights or possibilities of resuming to their studies. The lack of information, the rights are unknown. There is no advertising of information regarding the diploma recognition possibilities. Social workers, registration of services often lack training. The lack of support on a linguistic level, the inability to access the required level of French due to a lack of language training, insufficient language training means individuals remain blocked at too low a level of French to be eligible for higher education or jobs that match their skills or plans. Also, the administrative, psychological, and medical aspects are very difficult to reach. So individuals who manage to navigate these obstacles are often left to their own during their studies. The lack of resources allocated to CRUS, which is the state level that organizes and deals with students entity. So psychological support systems and university medicine impacts their quality of life. Another challenge is the destabilizing living conditions of refugees or exiled students that keep them in a state of insecurity that is incompatible with resuming their studies or continuing their studies. Insecure housing, limited resources to live on, the ban of work for asylum seekers stabilizes their lives and makes stable university experience difficult. Also, the limited working hours allowed for international students, exiled students, contributes to this instability. So discouraging systems also. So the directive of restrictive housing provided by the French Office of Immigration and Integration, which moves individuals to remote housing centers overnight. It breaks their ties, the plans. It discourages. There are discouraging discourse from the training staff, the rejection and the discrimination. There's the administrative treatment, the process of obtaining a paper, renewing the visa students, getting the asylum or any other residence permit is increasingly demanding and very slow, uncertain, and lengthy. It plunges individuals seeking administrative stability into uncertainty that is difficult to endure and constant administrative insecurity. The last one, but not least, is the limited access for female refugees. Despite the fact that female refugees represent half of the migrants in the world and are even a majority in France, they face numerous obstacles in their access to education, linguistic difficulties, as we already mentioned, administrative difficulties, gender-related discrimination, and lack of access to networks. Our main objectives, our main messages as the Union of Exiled Students, as a person who's representing France as well, is to defend access to higher education, to study in dignified and fair conditions, to fight against all the prejudice and discrimination, and defend unconditional and free access regardless of the person's administrative status. The university must be structurally able to accommodate student refugees and exiled students, and there should be an equality of treatment between French and foreign students. Education is an important aspect of life, and it's vital, and it prepares for the employment and inclusion and to one's own life choices. The refugees who access higher education, they need to develop the skills necessary for integration into the economic and social systems of their host country. So the recommendations that we have are on several levels: access to higher education, the enrollment level, French language training, and material level conditions. So I'll start with the access to higher education. How can we help them? We have to establish permanent and equal welcoming policies within universities throughout all of France. Schools and universities must be places where models of integration and unique means of meeting, reflection, and sharing are created. We have to make social integration of displaced people a priority in the educational system and other social systems. The French government must reduce very bureaucratic, lengthy obstacles imposed on this population, grant every displaced, exiled student, regardless of their administrative status, a true and real access to education at all levels without discrimination, allow them the freedom to choose what they want to study, not based on the market needs only, without having professional or technical training imposed on the needs of the French job market. So also higher education institutions must respond to the diverse needs of displaced students to facilitate their participation in student life and giving them the tools for academic success. We have to recognize that asylum seekers are full-fledged students, and providing them with access corresponding to their rights according to the 1951 Geneva Convention. The best possible treatment must be reserved for the asylum seekers. It is necessary that university staff, including the CRUS staff, to be properly trained on the specific situation of each student, whether they're exiled in all of the way, like if they're refugees, international students, foreign students who cannot go back to their homeland for personal or political reasons, to ensure a welcoming and orienting environment adapted to their needs without discrimination. On the enrollment level, we have to maintain an exemption mechanism in the host universities, and also maintain the extension of the exemption registration fees to exiled students. We would like to encourage abolishing the welcome plan in France that obliges an extra fee just because we're not French, which has been taking place the law took place around 2 years ago. So also in the case of absence of diploma, certificate or transcripts due to exiled conditions, exceptional orientation interviews for exiled students must be available to best support them or develop acquisition validation procedures to their situation. And the last one for enrollment is to guarantee the right of recognition of their already diplomas. They should put procedures to recognize the study level of candidates, those without diplomas, through also cohesive interviews. This procedure is already regulated by the Lisbon Convention of 1997, but it is not applied. French language learning. We demand that French language learning, the FLE, must be available beyond basic communication and unconditional access to academic and professional training for new arrivals. We have to guarantee the quality of the language training, not only make it available for French, for exiled students or even asylum seekers to do only one level, 2 levels, because the asylum request can take a very long time to be accepted. Some cases it takes 2 to 3 years. So giving them free sessions in only level 1 and level 2 is not going to help the person integrate during this hard process. So if the person does not have the required level in French as a foreign language, the university should offer to enroll in a welcoming program for asylum seekers, not because they're not yet accepted. They cannot enter, which is really an adherence to a person's personal life, which can also be a barrier for them to advance in a professional way and integrate in the country. It is necessary to put in place a harmonization of linguistic prerequisites for a university enrollment based on the required information and level, while maintaining a flexibility margin for asylum seekers and refugees in the process of language catch-up. So the last one is the material living conditions. So we would like to recommend that cruise scholarships must and housing must be available to all students enrolled in higher education, regardless of their nationality and administrative status. And they also should be provided to asylum seekers, because asylum seekers are not allowed to get a lot of advantages in the beginning, which, as I said before, it takes sometimes 1 to 2, 3 years to get their application accepted, even though by the law it says that it shouldn't take more than 6 months. The lack, we also encourage that, because lack of housing endangers the continuation of studies and puts them in a situation of great precariousness, access to safe, comfortable, and sustainable housing throughout the years of study at an affordable price for exiled students can guarantee their health, mental, and psychological security. We must increase the quotas of foreign students in university housing and opening applications to those from developing countries in the main phase, and not only in the complementary phase after all the places are taken. Removing the restriction on the number of working hours with a student visa, that can help a person also finance themselves if they find themselves that their parents cannot help them anymore, or they don't have enough finances. Because if this student happen to exceed the number of hours, the law does not support them and they can go into legal problems. For those in exile who do not have access to scholarship and have only the revenue of solidarity from the state, it is necessary to make the student status and the revenue of solidarity eligible and compatible, because difficulty to accessing scholarship and incompatibility between the revenue of the solidarity can also prevent students from having success in the future and integrating in the social aspect of it. So this is about it. This is about the inclusion, integration through education. And my name is Samaher. I am the member board of directors at the Union of Exiled Students. Let me know if you have questions, if you want to reach out. It's a pleasure to respond to anything. Thank you.
Which is a global problem, I think, at this point in time. So, you've talked about inclusion and integrating education for exiled students. So, how important do you think it is that the role of students and youth in forming educational curriculum in such a way that we can integrate these students more and more in our current educational systems? And also, what actions can we take at a personal level to make these students feel more included in the mainstream education?
So I think the necessary steps that we must take to ensure that students have access to higher education if exiled students is to take the first step and to integrate it in the state level policy. The state must support them on the policy level. It must be put in the laws. This is the most important thing. We cannot take always, the civil society cannot do everything alone. We work hand in hand in the government. We cannot have presidents, representative going out giving statements only. We need concrete action and steps from the government and the policy level. and on the civil society people, organizations. I believe that you can reach out, you can do mentoring for an exiled person. If you are already a local person, you can mentor one person, you can help them by anything possible to show them how to apply. I personally, before integrating the Union of Exiled Students, I used to individually work with refugees because I said, I'm from Yemen. There's a thin line. I could have been a refugee this easy. I was still on a student visa, but there was a thin line. I could have been a refugee easily, and I could not have been had the privilege to have access to education when I was young. So I knew the importance of that already. So these people need to be accompanied because I knew I needed that at that point, even though I wasn't a refugee and exiled in the political sense, but I was still exiled because I cannot go back to my country. So I would like also to highlight the importance of joining organizations that are very close to you, to volunteer, and to also ensure that if you can house a student, not only on the education level, because all these are complementary. You cannot just say you have to study, I will help you with the studying French, but this person does not have holistic approach where we want to help these people. Are they eating? Are they being housed? Do they have a job? Do they have finance? Are they receiving a revenue of solidarity? Do they have the right to receive that type of revenue? So it's always considering all these aspects when we try to help the person in front of us and engaging the partners we know with us. So, like, I know this organization can do that. I know that person can do that. It's always to be mobilized and to be active in it. So this is my advice on how people can approach these situations. Thank you.
Thank you so much,
If
Samaher.
there's
I
anything, I
definitely
can
agree.
also answer more questions.
Thank you so much, Samahir. I definitely agree that a helping hand can definitely uh, become a ray of sunshine. Moving on to our next speaker, I would like to introduce Marco Garcia. He holds an MA in International Relations from the University of Edinburgh. He was the head delegate of the Mexican Youth Delegation at the G20 2022, negotiating on diversity and inclusion and pushing for equal access to quality education within G20 countries. He has experience in counterterrorism and risk advisory, working at Dragonfly Intelligence, the Inter American Committee Against Terrorism of the Organization of American States, and London Politica. Having lived in Latin America, Africa, and Europe, he has a keen interest in creating multicultural spaces, taking advantage of acquired intercultural experience to positively contribute to his community and surroundings. We welcome you, Marco.
Thank you so much. And I would like to once again appreciate the opportunity to speak with you guys, to be surrounded with such inspiring people, youth leaders from all corners of the globe. I'm really keen to discuss not only what Mexico has brought to the table, but also to compare and contrast to all the great initiatives that we've seen in countries like Italy, France, Yemen, and South Africa. So first of all, hi folks, thanks so much for having me. I'm Marco. I was part of the Mexican delegation this past year, which allowed me to develop a really keen interest in quality and inclusive education and sort of the great barriers that exist within G20 countries and how to achieve that. Now, I have a presentation for you all. I will share my screen now. Share screen. Let me give you access just to share my screen. I don't think it's gonna allow me to share my screen. No, it's fine. All right. Seems like I can't seem to
No,
share my
I
screen. Pardon?
is there any problem? Maybe
Yeah, just my computer needs to give access to the Google Chrome browser to share my screen, but it says that oh, actually, I think I got it. Give me a second.
all right.
It's been 2 years after COVID and I still can't seem to be able to do this, right? We currently support that is fine. So save as let me just save the document as PDF. Okay, yeah, I think I got it. I'm going to share it now.
Yeah.
Cool. Slides, your computer, upload file. Desktop. Where? One second, folks. It doesn't seem to work for me. But again, if this doesn't work, it's not absolute paramount that we use the slides. It was just obviously being a new context, it might be more helpful for the audience. Presentation. Oh, I think Mexico PDF. Okay, so what is it? Fourth time's a charm or something? Present slides, your computer, upload file. Yeah, there we go. I got it. It's uploading, I think. So I don't know if you guys can see
Yes,
the.
just a moment. Yes.
Perfect. All right, so I think I can change the slides myself. Yeah, I can.
Yeah.
So sorry about that, guys, but
That's
yeah.
totally all right.
I'll be giving you guys a little bit of a rundown of what education looks like in Mexico, what Mexico has proposed at the multilateral arena in terms of how to reform education as a whole, and then what within the G20, specifically the Y20, we have proposed to further this agenda that we have of making education not necessarily a privilege, but a right that everybody must have. So in Mexico, we primarily drive our education through four principles, which is affordability, accessibility, acceptability, and adaptability. I'll build on this a little bit. But to understand the context of how we got here, we have to look into the past. And just like any other good story, let's start from the beginning, which was in our case, or at least in my case, COVID. So as we all know, youth was disproportionately affected by the COVID pandemic. A lot of our inner experiences, whether it was educational, professional, or emotional, these key opportunities for development were disrupted. And in some extreme cases, that might have led to a key knowledge gap in this sort of intergenerational transfer of knowledge that we are also used to. But for that year or so, really, that was heavily disrupted, which forced not only governments, but civil society and international organizations as a whole to really rethink how we approach education and how do we ensure sort of the continuity of education in light of major disruptions like what COVID was, for example. So the way I see it personally is that although COVID presented significant societal, political, and economic dislocations, I think this was a key opportunity for us last year to negotiate it and sort of hit the reset button and not just continue to do the same things that we used to do before, but to lead to new social paradigms that challenge our current preconceptions of what quality education or inclusive education is like. And, I feel like quite privileged, coming from Mexico, we have a very diverse and young workforce, specifically in the education sector. So I feel like that gave us sort of a unique position in what we can contribute to the table to address these issues at, big forums, for example. Right? So it is because of that us at the Y20 last year, we noticed this problem. And we recognized primarily since the Y20 of 2020 held in Saudi Arabia, and it was kind of a big theme in the subsequent conferences in 2021 and 2022, we found that it was absolutely essential that the transfer of intergenerational knowledge occurs, as well as the guarantee of a digital and physical means of education. As you know, education sort of found a really big base within digital infrastructure, even in countries where that wasn't necessarily, the educational systems weren't built around that preconception of what education is like, including Mexico. So Mexico had to go through a really rough and aggressive sort of transition period of ensuring that the government could continue providing the service for its citizens, but from a digital means. And I think this is a problem that only in Latin America we noticed, but in other regions such as Africa or in Asia, it was a big issue as well. And the way that Mexico is particularly keen on solving this issue is that we believe that youth should strive to join these new diverse and economic sectors. So, for example, the tech sector, or AI, and then push for new policies that take advantage of this new and educated labor force that we have. And particularly the way our government has sort of structured our approach to promoting education, not only nationally, but internationally, is that economic recovery and economic growth is closely correlated to having, yes, an educated labor force, but an educated labor force through a social dimension and a common welfare perspective. So very human rights based approach, which is what I'm going to present on right now, and also explain what Mexico has done internationally at that level. So I'm going to give you a brief rundown of the Mexican context, how we have been changing our approach in education the past 2 or 3 years or so. In fact, the Mexican education has changed a lot the past couple of years. The whole curriculum has been revamped. It's just being started to be implemented. It's a really, really exciting time. And the way that we did this was from moving from asymmetry to symmetry. So what does that mean? So I would first of all like to show you some key stats that I've noticed and the Mexican government has published regarding what were our main challenges when it came to education. So if you look at all sort of students between 2001 and 2018, you could really see where the dropout levels were. So we consider education from the second that you were born until you're 23 and you joined the wider labor force. So let's say 100 people join primary school. So out of those 100 people that join primary school, 8 are not going to finish it, and 88 will go to secondary education. So roughly 1 in 10 of those kids in primary school will not continue their education. After that, only 70 will start high school. So there was, in that transition, another big dropout rate. Out of those 70 that start high school, only 45 will finish, and only 34 will move on to higher education. And then by the end, only 24 students finish their studies, their higher education studies. So that means that out of 10 Mexicans that enter the education world for the first time, roughly only 2 will finish with a higher education degree. And then you could really notice that the great loss is in that transition between secondary school to high school and during secondary school. Now, why does that happen? There's many reasons why that might happen, not only in Mexico, but within Latin America, for example, which is, multiple socioeconomic needs, family, violent related reasons. Back then the curricula was structured in such a way that youth might not see a future in this. They don't see it as an attractive thing to finish per se. Sort of the value or the aggregated value of quality education throughout the year was not necessarily clear to them. So, in light of, for example, lack of safe installations, in lack of a safe community, in fact, of a loving family that could provide further ways of growth, youth started sort of losing interest in that value that we give education so much. So that's what we've noticed. And when the new administration came in 2018, there was a really big push to sort of revamp completely the Mexican curricula, to modernize it, if you will, and make sure that this big dropout problem that we have is addressed. So that led us to what we call the new Mexican school. So the NMS, La Nueva Escuela Mexicana. And this is the new approach that the government has just started implementing. And it's based on more international standards. It's based on more inclusive and tolerant values. So as I mentioned already, it's driven by 4 core principles: affordability, accessibility, acceptability, and adaptability of our education services. But what does this mean? So affordability implies the guarantee of the social right to free education, as well as a cultural right to respect diversity, especially for minorities. So as we all know, or as we all would like to believe, education is not a privilege, but it is a right that a state must provide for its citizens. And this was a further way of ensuring that not only the children go to school, but that they learn tolerant values as well. Accessibility means that it's an obligation of the state to provide free and inclusive education for everybody, from girls, boys, adolescents, and young people. Acceptability considers establishing a criteria of safety, quality, and warmth of education, as well as the professional qualities of teachers. So this has to deal with the wider issues of education, such as the infrastructure around it, how well capacitated are the teachers, what would the curriculum look like? And then finally, one that I personally find the most important is the adaptability point of view, which refers to the ability to adapt education to the social cultural context of students in each school, as well as to the promotion of human rights through education. So Mexico is a very multicultural country. The North, the Center, and the South have their own sort of regional niches that each educational subsystem needs to address. So it's really important that when we design an educational curriculum, it takes into account sort of the cultural values and borrow from, for example, as Neil mentioned earlier, for example, indigenous knowledge, which is very important to us as well. We have a very big indigenous community that for many years was unfortunately neglected. But it's good to see that we're moving towards this area of finally taking into account the indigenous knowledge and decolonizing the curriculum. So in a nutshell, this is how the new Mexican school is defined according to the Mexican government, which is the institution of the Mexican state responsible for the realization of the right to education throughout the journey of 0 to 23 years of age for Mexicans. This institution has at its center the comprehensive training of girls, boys, adolescents, and young people, and its objective is to promote learning of excellence, inclusive, multicultural, collaborative, and equitable throughout the course of their training from birth until the end of their studies, adapted to all regions of the Republic. So the very important takeaway here is that now we acknowledge that education is not a black and white thing. There is such thing as inclusive, multicultural, collaborative education, and that needs to be adapted for regions of the Republic to make sure that it targets the needs of each individual sort of like state within the country. So an example of that would be Mexico City. It's in the center of the country, and sort of the areas around Mexico City are very industrialized, very urbanized. But if you go towards the south of the country, for example, there's still really big indigenous rural population. I mean, obviously, the educational curriculum that you might necessarily think would work in an urban setting might not work in those settings. So it's really important that when building an educational curriculum, both nationally, well, locally and internationally, it adapts to the setting it's surrounded by. So what has Mexico proposed at the international arena, whether it's the G20 or whether it's another forum or our efforts as a whole to promote global education, for example, through the UN or the SDGs? So first of all, the thing that we've been very clear about always is that we need to recognize the new reality we live in. It's a matter of fact that we live in a post-COVID world. Things are not necessarily the same as they were before in early 2020, 2019. And the only way to really ensure and enforce that there's equitable participation in education throughout G20 countries is that there's both a physical and a digital means that you provide those tools to your students so that they can access education through both means. And the only way to really do that is to revamp our whole structural and financial architecture around the digital infrastructures that we have around countries to support that further growth and education. And even now that we have started or made significant progress towards digital learning, I really don't think that the progress has been really fully achieved in a way. So yes, digitalization has in many ways broken down social conventional barriers of space and time. So this would be a great example. I'm right now in London. I'm Mexican, but I'm based in London, speaking to this great panel in India. And this is a key resource that, for example, we need to explore within G20 countries. And then we need to really make sure that we push these technologies so that they can be used universally. And, yes, while being used to recognize universal values, also consider these cultural differences that, as I've mentioned before, are so important. And finally, societal goals and needs should be considered when driving an education change. The truth is that most educational frameworks were formulated 50, 100 years ago, and they don't really adapt to the current needs of the youth population. New sectors have exploded, as I mentioned earlier, for example, the tech sector. So a really new educational framework needs to provide an innovative basis to conceptualize the economy in a new way, the way that we, the young people, see it, because that's eventually where we're going to be. We're going to work in those new industries. And also the way we could do that is to recognize everyone's professional fluid characteristics. So that way our economic output and educational pathways can be diversified. So for example, a big topic that we spoke about within the G20 was, for example, entrepreneurial learning, making sure that you encourage youth to become entrepreneurs, to make sure that they have a really well understood basis of economics and making business, that way further diversifying their economies. And all of that led to what we proposed, Neil included, at the Y20 in last year, that we met in Indonesia, and we negotiated on many issues, including quality education. And Mexico particularly pushed for a revamp of our whole educational framework as a whole. It was supported by many countries, and I'm very happy to say that we adopted, and this is what we adopted. So we adopted that by 2028, G20 said should really take a particular focus in how we conceive education, right? So we live in a very complex, an increasingly complex world where, we're constantly being affected by whether it's migration, urbanization, greater diversity, climate change, for example. So really, the young people, not only us, but probably the people who will come after us, they would need to develop this greater cognitive flexibility, digital literacy, and innovative mindsets. So just to name a few. And how can we do this? We'll primarily be attempting to do this to three main approach, which is through creating value, reconciling tensions, and responsibility in diversity. So I'll run through them really quickly. So creating value just really means that you as a student, you're developing new ways of thinking. And then by that, you create new social and entrepreneurial paradigms. So you create new ways of thinking in which you can further diversify your economy. So whether it's revolutionizing a new sector or just creating a new economic sector as a whole, those things are quite important for the long-term growth of an economy, right? Another one is reconciling tensions that we currently have in the world, which is, you need to really strike a balance between clashing demands and needs. And I think students really need to learn how to do that from an early age to, for example, avoid prejudgment. And in a, ever-growing globalized world, understand these new points of view that emerge. So, us young leaders and other young leaders, it's extremely important that we make sure that we understand the consequences of our actions in the both short, medium, and long term. And finally, it's a responsibility in diversity, which is, as I mentioned already, our world is unfortunately a very complex one. And I think we really need to ensure that students deal with novelty, change, diversity, and ambiguity on a pretty much everyday basis to make sure that that they can adapt to these problems. And finally, something that we Mexicans find really important is, considering the groups that have been, historically marginalized, or have been given very, very, very little support. This might include, for example, people who with disabilities, immigrants, and mature students. So how do we include them to make sure our education is fully inclusive for example? And these are just some of the initiatives that we propose within the G20 to make sure that some of what we're implementing in Mexico, some of those good ideas and great ideas from other countries, we can sort of like standardize educational frameworks around the world to make sure that there's something, yes, that teaches universal values, but at the same time caters for this local, for example, indigenous knowledge that is also so very important. And I believe that is it. Thank you so much for your time, and I'll be taking any questions.
Yes, thank you so much, Neil. It was like really insightful and great to hear from you. And I don't think like we have any questions for you because your speech was like so descriptive that it covered pretty much everything. So moving on, Abhiniti, please invite our next guest.
Yeah. So let's invite our next guest, who is from Indonesia. We have Jaslyn Guawa. She's currently an education consultant in UNICEF Indonesia, focusing on facilitating coordination between governmental and non-governmental education stakeholders to improve education system transformation. She has previously worked in the Indonesian Ministry of Education, Culture, Research and Technology, as well as multiple think tanks and NGOs in the country. She received her Masters of Education from Harvard Graduate School of Education's International Education Policy Program. We welcome you, Jaslyn.
Hi there. Thank you very much for this opportunity. Very grateful to be speaking here with everyone and love listening to so many of your presentations. Let me try if I can share my screen. Okay, this should be it. So I think I will be just talking very briefly about, can everyone see my screen and hear me okay? I can't see anyone here, so.
Yes,
I
it's
can
not
hear you.
visible, I guess, personally.
Sorry?
I was saying that your screen is not visible.
We can hear you though. Yeah.
Yeah, so
But you can't see my screen?
we can see you all right, but we can't see your presentation at all. Oh, there we go.
Yeah.
Okay.
There we are.
Okay. I think it needed a little time. Okay. Yeah. So I think my presentation may be a little bit brief. I will be talking about Indonesia's education system, specifically focusing on their new reform, Merdeka Belajar, or emancipated learning, and particularly, I suppose, their new curriculum, because I guess what's interesting about where Indonesia stands right now in their education system is they are trying to radically transform their education system, moving away from the typical rote learning kind of education structure in the classroom to a more dynamic, project-based, 21st century skill-focused learning. So I'll just be going through a couple of the essence of this emancipated learning reform, the new curriculum, notable things the ministry and the government of Indonesia has done to realize this change, and I suppose a little bit of what they have tried reaching out to development partners. I think that may include also youth organizations and institutions as well, to rally in on this Merdeka Belajar reform. And if you have any questions or anything, please just feel free to put it in the chat, or even, I guess, cut me off if I'm going too fast or anything. So yeah, thank you so much. Merdeka Belajar, essentially, as I mentioned, is emancipated learning. Like I said earlier, moving away from rote learning and allowing teachers, giving them the autonomy and the essence to interpret the basic curriculum, core competencies, essentially teaching literacy and numeracy to children in a more freeing and independent way. I guess a little bit of context, because beforehand teachers are very burdened by administrative struggles. They have to plan out what they would be teaching in the classroom by the minute, and they have to do that for every session, every week, every semester, and that takes quite a mental toll on teachers and on educators. So what this new curriculum is trying to do is essentially strip that out and cut a lot of the peripheral areas of the curriculum and just really focus on honing basic core competencies and skills for young children, and for adolescents and middle and high school students as well. The latter part, they would focus more on 21st century skills development and character development also, so creativity, collaboration, and such the like. Four major things that they have done in order to realize this is, like I said, allowing teachers more independence to assess and also teach and ensure that their students are learning. They've removed the high stakes national assessment that determines grade progression, and as I think a lot of educators know, causes a lot of harmful stress for students and teachers, and they replaced it with a more low stakes national assessment survey, they call it, which again focuses on basic literacy, numeracy, and character skills. Another interesting thing about this is also it tries to measure bullying, intolerance, and sexual abuse or violence in the perspective of the students, so that the schools and their district governments are able to gauge that that school environment, that's healthy school environment. The third thing is allowance of more flexibility to develop more concise lesson plans. Like I said earlier, not really being too heavy on the administrative process, but more allowing teachers to focus on learning and student pedagogy. The fourth is a little bit more niche, and I guess you would need to know the previous Indonesia-centered learning context. They removed the zonations because previously each district or area would have their own school associated to that district or area for geographic proximity purposes. But those schools would not necessarily be the best schools or have the best quality teachers. They may not be the best fit for the students, but they would be, I suppose, more compelled to stay there because it would be more easier administratively to go to that school. But now students have more freedom to choose which schools they would like to attend. For the Merdeka curriculum, what the Merdeka curriculum is essentially a focus on more core competency project-based learning. And this takes a lot from the OECD's knowledge, attitudes, and skills model, which you can also read more about in the Ministry of Education's website. They try to focus on foundational skills as the main knowledge piece of this model. They focus on building student character, attitudes, and values through what's called the Profil Pelajar Pancasila, or that's translated as the Pancasila Student Profile, which is the 21st century skills equivalent. And I don't have it here, but it's essentially collaboration, creativity. There's, sorry, yeah, it's the 6 different Pancasila student profiles, if you're interested in looking at them. And they also really encourage project-based learning. So instead of focusing on specific subject matters, chemistry, science, history, and whatnot, they would encourage teachers and students to cross-collaborate between different subjects and focus on larger, more relevant global topics such as climate change, living a healthy lifestyle. This also includes financial literacy, although some of these big themes are still in the works. It's still progressing as we're going. And they're also trying to do all this while being under the umbrella of going through a major digital transition. So as a couple of the speakers today in the session have mentioned, technology is a big thing that could serve to make a more level playing field despite the different technological inequities that are present in the country. Indonesia is also trying to do similar things with its curriculum and with its new education reform. Yeah, so trying to break the curriculum down a bit more into different areas of focus. It has a more basic framework. It has more targeted competencies, which focus on skills, knowledge, and attitudes. There's a more thematic, bigger picture structure to the curriculum, less individual subject, more project-based learning, and more flexible with instructional time as well. So it also encourages the teachers to collaborate as well as the students, and it allows them to really focus on how they can prepare students for a changing world and to understand the realities of what the world needs and how they can be global citizens, essentially. this model of changing the new curriculum also helps students and teachers, also helps teachers practice differentiated teaching and learning. So as some of you may know, perhaps teaching at the right level, it really tries to build a model that encourages and pushes teachers to do that in their schools and in their classrooms. And it also encourages the use of formative assessments to inform their learning design, because teachers are less pressured to put their time in administrative matters. The desire and hope is that they can work more collaboratively with other teachers to be able to understand and see where their students are at and help them at their own level. So not really pressuring their students either to be able to do well or reach a specific target, but really honing the students' curiosity, learning, and just, again, doubling down on the core skills element of learning. And underpinning all this, the government is also, again, trying to use digital tools and technology to help teachers implement this new curriculum and this new way of teaching and learning through providing a lot of material online, teaching tools, teaching guides, micro-learning videos, and really trying to tap into teacher learning communities or teacher working groups, where in each district there are certain clusters of schools who often come together every month or so to ideally talk about teaching methods and what they can learn from one another to improve their teaching. Curriculum tools are also similar, provided by the government, also helped by a lot of development organizations and institutions focusing on education to support these in their targeted areas and harder to reach areas. The essence and the implementation of the America curriculum. We've gone through this a little bit, focusing on teaching at the right level, contextual, and focusing on local context, ensuring children are able to build out their curiosity and enjoy the process of learning more than teaching to the test, and helping teachers to be able to focus more on their craft, their teaching, and their pedagogy, helping one another and learning from one another more, instead of just trying to get their students to reach and be able to pass in the best with the best grades, the national assessments. The goal with this overall is to change the culture of learning and encourage communities to come together to help teachers and their students to build their highest potential, because as we know the phrase, it takes a village to raise a child, and this is essentially trying to rework that into this new emancipated learning curriculum and reform. The core competencies, as I mentioned earlier, numeracy, literacy, and character, are Bahasa Indonesia, so the Indonesian language, mathematics, as well as natural and social sciences as part of the larger thematic groups that they are trying to instill in students. The English language is also beginning to be strengthened and integrated in as early as primary grades, because previously it has not been too great of a focus. And they also have a section in the curriculum where teachers are free to teach to the local context. So it's local educations, and this is including in the wider thematic areas also. So there's a lot of flexibility in this, but part of the challenges is also how teachers can accurately implement. And there's some reluctance in that, but we can get to that a bit later. As I said, the government is trying to provide tools, textbooks, online teaching material, non-textbook, sharing resources through their digital platforms, providing webinars, inviting prominent education figures across the country to be able to encourage the use of this, providing curriculum tools, and also reaching out to development partners, non-governmental partners, education institutions to support the training and socialization of this Merdeka curriculum. One of the positive sides of this is that the government is reaching out to a lot of non-government institutions to help solidify this reform, because it is not easy anywhere in the world to implement a reform as wide, especially in a country as diverse as Indonesia. And so they understand the need for it to be asymmetrical based on readiness and capacity of different organizations to support the ministry in different capacities. It has to be need-based. A lot of the times the government knows that schools, districts often reach out for more help and support, and that's where a lot of it is also focused. Independently funded, this is more specific to development partners, because a lot of them will have some resources and channeling to support the schools and districts, and they would encourage routine communication and have regular mechanisms to be able to close the feedback loop as needed with the schools and government counterparts. Yeah, this is, sorry, it's not very well translated yet, but essentially these are the 4 pillars that the government is focusing on to provide the support. Local governments, including district education officers, as well as other district-based government bodies. The second one is Komunitas Belajar, learning communities. Satuan Belajar is education units, so like schools, education institutions, as well as UPT. So UPT is like individual learning posts where there are education personnel who try and spread and also document best practices to be able to circulate more widely as knowledge generation and evidence piece. Yeah, so I hope I didn't go too quickly or exceed the time slot, but that's part of my presentation. And let me know if you want me to go back to anything to clarify any points. But thank you.
Thank you, Jasmine. Thank you so much for such an enlightening presentation, I would say. You have given us great insights in the new education policy adopted by Indonesia. And we are like in India as well, we are also in process of adopting new education policy 2020. So like it was really great to sort of run a comparative analysis of our own while hearing to the new educational model of Indonesia. So thank you so much, Jasmine. And I guess now we are towards the conclusion part of the session. So I would like to quickly call
Yeah, Ria,
for
before that,
yes.
I would like to ask all our speakers if they wanted to add some comment about today's event, or they wish to share about this initiative or something that they feel like. Anybody?
Just to be, so what do we think about the event as a whole?
Yeah.
I can give a very brief sort of thought of what I think. No, I think it's great. I think you guys having this the G20 presidencies, you guys have a unique platform that only comes once every 20 years. So it's great to see that you're doing the most you can with that platform to try and fight for better quality education. So no, props to you guys.
Yeah, I think I'll also just add to that and say I think it's a really great initiative, bringing together all these different countries, and I think all our presentations were greatly varied in their focus and how they approached problems, and and solutions, which I found really, really enriching. So I think, as a creating this archive of really interesting knowledge sharing is going to go a long way in this dialogue, which is really great. So big thanks to Sarkari and the WeCitizens Foundation.
Yeah. And I think I'd just like to echo Marco and Neil and say how I really appreciate the diversity of the topics that has been presented here, especially Samaher's non-formal education focus also in learning about the different governments models, which we could definitely take in our own work and further establish and think about. So thank you.
Yeah,
Yes,
Samriddhi,
thank
let's go for the vote of thanks.
Thank you so much all for your inputs, and it was great to learn about the education systems of each country. Fabiola already left, but it was already it was very beneficial to learn about Italy, Mexico, South Africa, and I loved the correlation Neil made between the South Africa education system and India and the integration of technology in education, and also hopefully now it's going to turn into artificial intelligence very soon with the chat GPT entering the scene. So I believe technology is going to really transform education highly in the way we learn and the way we teach in the sector.
I
thank you
think
so
I'll
much,
move
Sarah.
ahead. Hello, everyone. I'm Samriddhi. Firstly, it was lovely hearing from you all. Now, I would like to extend my hearty gratitude on behalf of the entire team of We Citizens Foundation and Sarkari School to our dedicated speakers and curious audience for making this session so engaging. I appreciate the professionalism of our speakers who devoted their precious time in researching their educational models and suggesting some awesome reforms. Thank you for giving your time. You really made a difference, the difference you'll see in the near future taking shape. This will not only make our education globalized, but also our track to relations. So we are looking forward to hearing from you to speak for us again and collaborate with us, for our future endeavors. Thank you.
Thank
Thank
you.
you all.
Thank you so
Thank
much.
you so
It was
much.
lovely
Thank
hearing
you so
from you
much,
all, guys.
everyone. It was really great panel
Good luck
discussion
all
from
for us.
everybody.